Hey guys, my name is Chimagazo and welcome to my channel. If you have recently found the channel, please consider subscribing for all things relatable, easy and affordable homemaking content. And if you have recently joined the family, and there were a few of you who joined the family recently, please leave me a hello on the comment section where I can warmly welcome you over there. Alright. As you can see, today's video is a sit down, it's a chatty video, right? And what we are going to talk about, but maybe before I get to that, just so this time last year, I had begun processing all the paperwork necessary for buying the property that you guys saw me renovating through Project Muope over the past couple of months. And throughout that renovation series, I realized that there were so many people who needed some knowledge pertaining to buying property, residential property to be particular. And also, having been a trustee in the complex that I stay in, I realized as a number of things that I feel like, especially young, previously marginalized people are not aware of. And I thought perhaps this would make an opportune moment to talk through some of the things that we should know pertaining buying property. I must, first of all, and very importantly, emphasize that I am not trained or an expertise in the subject matter. So the views that I'm going to be sharing really will emanate from the knowledge that I have read in preparation and researching for my own properties, or it will also come from my lived experience. So while you are going to consume this knowledge, I think that it's quite important that before you make your decision, you still consult someone who is trained in property or even finances. Right, now that we have the disclaimer out of the way, let us get into the topic. And you'll pardon me today, I will keep looking away because I have written down a few points that I'd like to discuss in today's video on my iPad. So what exactly are we talking about? As you can see, or as you have seen from the thumbnail, we are going to talk about whether there is a perfect age or an ideal age to buy property, and also talk a bit on what is best between owning and renting property. And I hope that this video is going to be informative and useful. Just before we get into the chatty bits, I did pose a question on my IG stories, I think on Saturday night. I realized that most of the questions would sort of need like a basis from which we can then answer them. So I thought, let me do today's video as an introduction before I can answer your questions about property. That said, should you have any follow-up questions from today's video, you're welcome to leave them on the comment section, or also come and leave them on my DM on IG, and I'll do my best to answer them in the next video after this one. Now let's get into the discussion. I think let's just, as a point of departure, talk about what is the best age to buy property, right? And once again, this is just my opinion. My opinion is obviously not the universal truth. I think what you will do with my opinion really is just use it as a basis or background to inform your decision making, along with other open resources which you can consult on the subject matter. Right now, let's talk about the best age about buying property. My view is that, first of all, there is no right or wrong answer. But very important, I think, to me is that buying a home or property, a residential property, should not be a decision that you make based on your age. This is my sincere view. It should not be a decision that you make based on your age. And having bought my residential property in my early 30s, I can confidently say, knowing what I know now, having experienced the things that I have experienced now in my early 30s, I'm so glad, I really am so glad that I did not succumb to the pressure to buy property in my early 20s just because I had a job or because my peers were doing the same. So, my answer to the question therefore would be that an ideal time, rather, not an age, to buy property would be when you are financially ready for it. That to me, knowing what I know now, I can confidently say that buying property is best based on the timing as opposed to the age. However, that being my opinion based on my lived experiences, there are certain considerations, or rather certain economic considerations, which we might want to also exhaust and study in order to also support that decision making or even oppose it. And I'd like for us to get into that a bit later on. First, let us tackle the good old debate of whether it is best or ideal to rent or to own. What is my view? Once again, my views are not universal. Look, given the current economic climate in South Africa, whether you're renting, whether you're owning, the prices are skyrocketing, and they get skyrocketing. In the past month, we have all experienced the CPI fluctuate. So whatever situation you find yourself in, you will be paying a whole lot of money for having a roof over your head. So then that decision therefore should be based on other ideals as opposed to just what you get to pay in as far as having a roof over your head is concerned. And let's get into that. I would say that first of all, it's best to make your decision based on number one, timing. I believe that timing is everything, especially if you're going to buying property is most probably going to be one of your biggest expenses or expenditure in life. So therefore, I believe that before you can decide whether you want to buy or rent, timing is very important. And what do I mean by that? I would say that you need to look into your life, where you are in your life. It could also be emotionally, it could be mentally, it could be physically, it could be especially financially. It could also just be socially. For example, are you single? Are you married? Do you intend to stay in the specific location where you intend to buy, perhaps for even the next 5 or 10 years? Because for example, if you do intend to stay in an area or place in the city for 2 years, you must really consider if you really want to purchase property, because while they may say that purchasing property is an investment, you must then consider that should I buy property and I intend moving out of the city in 2 years, one, do I want to rent it out? 2, do I want to sell it? In a case where you sell it under 2 years, would it have accumulated enough money in order to bring you a profit? Or secondly, should you want to then rent it when you are out of the city, would you have the capacity to manage a property that is not within your vicinity? So timing therefore is everything, and timing, you will be considering your social status, and I think also very importantly, your financial status. All right, and the second thing that I feel like you need to consider, even though I've placed it secondly, but I have kept referencing it, is checking your finances. Finances are critical. But I must also tell you that whether you do opt for renting or owning, each one of your decisions will have its advantages and its disadvantages. And perhaps to break down the issue into digestible bits, let us talk about advantages and disadvantages of each option. First off, let's talk about the advantages of renting. In my lived experience, and maybe I've got a good example to illustrate on this one, renting is usually far more affordable compared to buying. You could, in my case, for example, the property in which I've bought for, I've rented before. And knowing what I used to spend in a property, in a similar property while I was renting, and what I spend on a monthly basis now that I'm an owner, there are two highly different options. Highly, and when I do say highly, I mean highly. And what is notable in this instance is that even though the property that you could be renting and or owning may have a similar features, the price and cost of owning and renting will always be different. And in this case, renting will always be a much more affordable option. And although today's video is not exactly about getting into the nitty-gritties and the numbers of either options, there will be a video for that. Let me just indulge you a bit on a specific option. I think when most young people buy property, they tend to think that the bond payment, what you will pay to the bank in return of their financing, is all you need. And that is exactly just the opposite. It is exactly just the opposite. And in fact, this is quite a broad topic that needs an entire full video on its own. First of all, besides the rent, you may need to, depending on whether you have bought into a freestanding property or into sectional title scheme. In a sectional title scheme, there are many other costs. Depending on the kind of estate that you may be residing or that you have bought in, you may have to pay taxes, levies, still the municipality, and the actual monthly maintenance of particular property. Add on to that the fluctuations of the markets, because if I can just tell you now, what I pay today in 2023 March for this property is a bit high from what I paid last year when I took out the mortgage, and that is just because of the fluctuating market rates. So that becomes then very important. I have spoken about strategizing on how to go about shopping for bonds in a video I did earlier on when I bought the property. I'll just link that video here so that you guys can sort of have an idea of how you can go about determining how much from your affordability range, how much should you spend in order to still live comfortably, whatever bond or rate you get to purchase your property. The second advantage of renting is that it offers you flexibility. Look, with renting, you usually and or ideally are in like about a 12-month contract, depending from agent or owner to owner. Some may even be 6 months, some may be 3 months renewable, and so on and so forth. And therefore, that sort of gives you the flexibility of moving around, especially when you're still young and you still want to sort of explore the city and things like that. That is not necessarily an option that you would have when you are an owner. That being an owner sort of binds you in that property for a number of reasons. We're not going to get into that. But I think flexibility then becomes a huge risk. And I think this also speaks to the idea that I spoke earlier to say that you've got to consider the timing. You've got to consider the timing. So the flexibility found in renting, therefore, falls under the timing. If, for example, you are intending to change jobs to move from, say, example, Western Cape to Gauteng, you might not necessarily want to buy a primary residence then in where you currently are. Right. Now, the third advantage of renting is that the main tenant costs of the property are not yours but the owners. And that is such a biggie. That is such a biggie. When you are renting, you could have a gutter problem, you could have geyser problems, you could have light problems, you could have this problem, that problem. You pay your rental once and the owner must take care of everything. And that is something that can potentially cost you a couple of $1,000 when you are an owner. So that, I think, in a nutshell, sort of covers what the pros or advantages of renting are. Now, let's quickly look at what some of the disadvantages of renting. I think for me, the first one is that you're not really able to customize the property that you live in a manner that suits your needs. I remember there was one time I had an accident at work and I was not mobile and I stayed in a flat. And if I can tell you that how difficult it was going up and down the stairs without an elevator. And I thought if the property was mine, you can easily build a rail. But in that situation, you are not able to. These also just comes to small things that much as aesthetics. You are not really able to make the place you live in as enjoyable and as aesthetically pleasing as you would like it to be. But secondly, and I think possibly the biggest, is that when you are renting, you are potentially helping an owner pay off their property, and at the end of your rental, you really don't have anything to show for your money. For example, if you are renting this property that I'm in right now for 10,000 rands per month over 10 years, not over 10,000 years, over 10 years, that is a lot of money that you help towards paying off my property. And in the end, you really do not have anything to show for that money. So that, I think, for most people is one of the things that sort of pushes them to buy property even though they are not ready. And while it is a biggie, it really should not be the only prime and the only idea that pushes you to buy property. The third disadvantage of renting is that it does not provide you long-term security and stability. And that, for so many of us, is something that is very important. Imagine, for example, you are a young mother, you've got young children, and you rent in this particular process. And in a month or 2 months time, while you're settled and going by, I give you a notice to say that I need you to be out in the next 30 days because I need to sell my property, or whatever the case may be. That can easily disrupt the flow and ease off your life. So flexibility and security are then also one of those biggest disadvantages of renting. Right, now moving on, let us look into the advantages of owning a property. When you own, the biggest advantage is that you invest your money in an asset that appreciates value. So unlike rentals, whereby you're helping someone pay their bond over a period of years and have nothing to show for your money, with owning, you can say in 2 years time, you bought property in 2018 at 10 rands, and in the next 2 years it is now at 9 rands, but its value has actually appreciated. So that's a big bonus. The second advantage is that owning property will help you build personal wealth in the long term, as the value will keep growing while the amount you owe your home loan keeps decreasing. And that's a big plus. And so what happens in that scenario is that in the future, you are able, or you could potentially sell the property and make a handsome profit. The third, or I think fourth advantage of owning property is that it provides you security and stability and the peace of mind that your house is yours to own and yours to do as you please. Right. Now, let us look into the disadvantages of owning a property. I think, as I've mentioned earlier on, the biggest thing is that buying a property entails many expenses in addition to the purchasing price. This can include a deposit, which is usually around about 10% of the total price or the total cost of the property that you're buying. And it can also include transfer fees, it includes rates, taxes, municipality, maintenance, and so on and so forth. Another disadvantage, especially when you are buying property for the first time or you are new into the property market, is that you may need to have a deposit ready. And often you find that first-time home buyers are not necessarily prepared for that expense. So what often happens is that you are approved to buy a certain house and you realize that you need to have 100,000 ready in order to get the process going. And because you did not have that on standby, you did not budget or prepare for that, you go about applying for a personal loan or max out your credit card, which may then also add on to the actual expenditure that you will then need to pay at the end of every month. So once again, people are not always prepared to say how much money does it actually cost to own property beyond the bond amount. I think the conversation about the total cost of your property is one that we need to often have, because so many people, especially first-time home buyers, blindly purchase properties only to dip into financial problems in about 4 or 5 months, because not many people are having the conversation of about how much exactly owning a property costs. Let me put down this and give you an example without necessarily getting into tiny and nitty-gritties of the details. I think I mentioned earlier on that the amount that I pay today in March 2023 is about 2,000 rands more than what I initially signed to pay when I took out the bond. And this is because of the fluctuation in the market. So, say for example, your bond amount is 13,000 when you take it out, right? 13,000 rand. And in the past couple of months, you've had these fluctuations, and they've had to, in between, although it does not happen all at the same time, they've had to add about 2,500 rand. So that means that you are then paying 15,500 rand for the bond alone. Adding to that expense, on a monthly basis, if you are staying in a sectional title, you've got levies and rates that I think on like a standard estate, you're looking at about 2.5, 3,000, somewhere around there. Then you've got your municipal rates, say around 1,000 or less. Then you've got water and electricity. You're looking at about 2,000 rands. And then you've got maintenance. You could easily have a best geyser. You could easily have some sort of maintenance problem that is not necessarily covered in insurance. Insurance is another thing that you must take out when you are owning property. So from the ideal that you are approved to take out a property that would cost you 13,000 rand, I would say that you need to prepare to add on an additional 7,000 rands to cover everything else that I have mentioned you may need, especially if you live in a sectional title. And there would be a bit of a varying difference between someone who is purchasing a residential property in a freestanding house and a sectional title, and we'll talk about that in the next video. All right, now that we have exhausted the advantages and disadvantages of both owning and renting, let us go back to the question about what is the ideal age of buying property. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that buying property should be something that you decide based on your age, but it should be based on your state of readiness, especially taking into consideration your financial and social readiness. However, I also mentioned earlier that there are certain interesting economic facts to consider along with my opinion. And the first one is that if you ask any property investor, anyone, they will tell you that it is ideal and they would recommend that the younger or the sooner you invest in property, the better. And I think that given some of the advantages that we have discussed, one may from face value also agree that it is better to buy property as soon as possible. But let me also talk you through some of the interesting things to consider in the current economic climate in South Africa. Number one is that purchasing a home in your early 30s or even 20s gives you access to an asset you can borrow against or use to generate income through rent. Secondly, it is also possible to have your bond paid off by the time you reach your 40s. That is, if you start or rather buy a property in your early 20s. It is possible to have a property paid out by the time you're 40, given the financing structures in South Africa, where you're looking into normally paying about between 20 to 30 years if you are, and of course, if you are adding a bit more, slightly less than that, right? But also, when you are in that 20s and 30s, there is an increased competition between banks, that leads to a higher loan approval rate, especially for young professionals and for first-time home buyers. Another great advantage that if you are considering buying property and you're under 35, you're a young professional, is that specific home loan packages and subsidies provide invaluable assistance to first home buyers under the age of 35, and which in turn removes the burden of a deposit and barrier for so many people to enter the property buying market. And so to talk a bit about that, I know, for example, it could be that all banks have it, but I know for sure that ABSA and FNB and Standard Bank, if I'm not mistaken, they have got like a young professional kind of subsidy, which you would need to read in detail. But just to give you an overview of what that is that when you apply for 100% home loan and you're under the age of 35, you've got a 4-year degree, and you are buying a property, I think under 1.2 million. They've got like a subsidy to say that if you fall within that range, they've got a program where they subsidize people who fall under that criteria, to say over and above the 100% home loan that you're applying, they subsidize your registration costs, attorney fees, and all the other little additional costs that end up costing so much. And so I think often it's 100% home loan plus the 10% and 5% in some home loans. So if you're considering buying property and you are under 35, you're a young professional with a 4-year degree, this is something worth checking out. I also do recommend, and I have spoken about this in previous videos, to seek help from a bond originator. In South Africa, I know of Better Bonds. There's also Uber Home Loans. They are bond originators, and what they do is they help the banks find customers, but also they help you try and negotiate all those nitty-gritties that, especially as a first-time home buyer, you're not really knowledgeable about. So another thing to consider in our South African current climate, which did not necessarily exist before, is that there is a government subsidy called FLISP. It's, I think, FLISP. Let me check it out. FLISP, and it is a government subsidy aimed at low-income home buyers. So for example, suppose your income, and this could be just your income as an individual or combined income with whoever you are buying property, and it's between 3,501 to 22,000 rand a month, and you meet specific criteria which you can find on government websites, is that in that case you can apply for that subsidy, and they can give you money which you can use then as deposit, but it is not paid into your direct account, it is paid into the bank, and this then also helps you to gain access to the property market for especially marginalized people who would under normal circumstance not qualify to get access or buy property, owing to initiation, registration, and attorney fees, and so on and so on. I hope that you find this video informative, useful. Do share it with your friends, family, and especially people who find themselves in the edge between buying and or renting property. I know that there are a number of you who have sent me property or first time home buying questions. I will be answering all your questions in the next video. I just thought that it would be useful that we first have this conversation, so that when we answer those questions, you have already determined whether it is ideal that you own at this time of your life, or if it is that you are ready to buy property. Let me know what your thoughts and all questions are on the comment section. Until the next one, do keep safe and thank you for watching.